Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today is the first video in my 2021 team preview videos. We are going to start this season off at the top, unlike the past couple seasons where I started from the bottom and broke down the rosters of all the teams starting from the 20th seeded team up into the first seeded team. We are going to start from the very top based on regular season record from the 2020 season. Which means today the first team we'll be talking about is the Shanghai Dragons. Yes, folks. Though they didn't win the grand finals, they were the team with the best overall record in the regular season for 2020. So, they're the team we're going to talk about first. At the moment, my plan is to do one of these videos every 2 days, and then eventually, if I don't have the time, based on when the season starts, I'll ramp it up to 3 days a week. So for now, Mondays and Fridays are when you can expect these, with some Wednesday videos in between. Maybe not this week, but in the coming weeks. So, Shanghai, let's talk about them. From 0-40 in 2018 to the best record in the league in 2020, how do they look going into 2021? Unsurprisingly, this team did not see a ton of changes. Of the roster from last season, they have 6 returning players, including 3 DPS players, their 2 starting supports, and their off-tank. So let's go position by position and just kind of talk about what they have and give you my thoughts on it. So to start with the DPS lineup, returning MVP Fleta is, of course, coming back to the team. Alongside Lip, who was a role star for 2020. DM also returning to this team, giving them very good hit scan, long-range hit scan especially. And they also bring in Erster, formerly of the Atlanta Reign. Now, what's interesting of note about Erster and very important to understand about Erster is that Erster previously was a player under Moon, who is the head coach for the Shanghai Dragons. Moon formerly coached Mighty AOD and Ardiant. Those are where he coached Erster. I believe he specifically coached him at Mighty AOD. I don't think he coached him at Ardiant. He did actually coach him at Ardiant. I take that back. So that's where he spent his time with Erster. So we know Erster is, of course, a very good player. Erster didn't have the best season last season, but a good pickup here for a very good Shanghai Dragons team. I think this is actually a very good DPS group they have here. Fleta, of course, very, very flexible in what he can play. You pair that with Lip as kind of your main 2 players, you have a ton of really, really good quality play. Fleta, of course, known a lot for his Genji, his Pharah, his Tracer especially, his Echo. He can pull out some Widowmaker every so often. Erster, on the other hand, some of the same here. He's got that Genji, he's got that Pharah. Of course, he's also known for his Doomfist. He's got a pretty good Junkrat. His Hanzo is also very good. He's also had some big moments on Tracer in the past, although that's definitely not his kind of strong suit. He's also a pretty good Mei as well. As we saw last season, he was pretty good. So I think any type of meta where you can have like an Echo Tracer type of composition, or Genji Tracer Dive, anything like that, is where I think you would definitely see Fleta Erster play together. Lip is definitely more of your kind of Sombra McCree type of player, a little bit of Ashe. Short range hit scan is more his style, and then DM, of course, your big Widowmaker sniper type player. I think this is actually a 4 DPS player lineup that's really good. They cover pretty much everything, if not just everything there is to cover from DPS players. So I really do like this lineup. I think Erster is a good addition to this team. I think he is better than Ding, though I do think Ding is a very, very good player. And I think that is one of the things that has really elevated this Shanghai Dragons roster in the DPS lineup. I do think this DPS lineup is better as a whole. It is an upgrade from Ding to Erster. And then everybody else in this lineup, with the exception of Dia, of course, leaving, is the same. And so I do like what we're seeing from this team. I think Erster will get a little bit more playtime than what we saw from Ding last season. Ding only played a couple maps here and there, and maybe an entire match, but I don't even think he did, because it was just Fleta and Lip show. But I think there will be some more room potentially, depending on if we see hero pools come back or whatnot. I don't really know, but I do think there is room for Erster to get some playtime. But I expect Fleta Lip to be the primary two here. Coming off of a very good rookie season for Lip, I would be surprised if he didn't get a ton of playtime. Now, of course, a big part of this is how much we see Ashe and Widowmaker get playtime, especially Widowmaker, because that's where DM really shines. I would love to see DM have more time worked into this roster. I don't know if he is the best option they have for this team. Lip was very good for this team last season. Every time Lip played, they did their best. But I do think DM is very, very good, and he's incredible on the long-range hit scan. So I would like to see him get worked into this roster as much as possible, because I think that when he does play, he adds a bit of an explosive element that a lot of other players don't have. And I also think that Erster is the type of player I'm interested in as well. I don't know if Erster is a very good Sombra. I don't think we saw it very much. It's definitely not listed as one of his kind of known heroes. Lip is a very good Sombra in terms of effectiveness at kind of charging the EMP. I think the thing that they really need to take that next leap going into 2021, Lip needs to get a lot better at his EMP usage, because his usage of EMP was always somewhat questionable. He didn't have the best understanding of when to use it. He would use it and only kind of catch one player, if that. He whiffed a lot on using EMPs. But the way he played Sombra was very, very good, and something that we didn't see from many other players in a very similar kind of style of play, I guess. So it is a very interesting thing to look at, and very unique in the way that Lip was able to do so much on that hero in terms of getting damage and charging the ultimates. But I do want to see a little more from him in his usage of the EMPs. And I think having this 4 DPS lineup will be very good for the team because of a ton of flexibility, and I'm really excited to see what they have. Moving on to the tanks, we of course have Void returning Rollstar. Had a great season last season. He was incredible. I think he was the best flex tank. I think arguably he was the MVP. He didn't win MVP, obviously, but he was arguably one of the top MVP candidates and could have been considered for the award based on his play throughout the season. I thought he was very, very good. I thought he was very consistent. And I think that he proved that he was very, very, very important to the team. And that is a big part of why I think that he really does come into this season as arguably the most important player on this Shanghai Dragons roster. He can play all of the flex tanks, which is really good. A lot of flex tanks struggle on one or two of the heroes, and they don't play that the best or at a super high level. But I've never looked at Void or seen Void play and thought that he couldn't play one of the off-tank heroes not look good from Void. So that's one of the big things I look at with him. And a big part of why I think that he is definitely one of the players to look out for this team. And I think he will be the difference maker for this team. The big change to their starting lineup, in my opinion, is, of course, that the main tank position is changing. Fearless was their main tank last season, as well as Stand 1. Both of those players are no longer on the team. Fearless, of course, to the Dallas Fuel, and Stand 1 to the Boston Uprising. The replacement that they have is Fate, formerly of the Florida Mayhem, and before that, the LA Valiant. Fate has history playing with Coach Moon, of course, with the LA Valiant, also Mighty AOD. So, long history for Fate with Moon. So it's a very interesting pickup. And really the question here is, how well does Fate, who was not a role star last season, who was on a good team, but not a top-level playoff championship-winning caliber team like we saw from Shanghai last season, how good is Fate, and is this team going to see a noticeable dip in performance from the switch to Fearless, or from Fearless to Fate? And I think ultimately the answer really comes down to, I think the answer is no. I think Fate has proven to be a very good main tank. He's very flexible. He doesn't have a main tank where you look at it and say he can't play this hero. His Winston is especially very good. I think his Reinhardt is pretty good. It's not a problem. I like his Orisa, and I think his Wrecking Ball is fine as well. he's not a main tank that I think is going to be holding this team back. And I think all things considered, he might be the weakest player positionally on the Shanghai Dragons, which is very good. If your weakest player is Fate, your team is very good. Now, you could argue maybe the weakest position is flex support. We'll talk about that in a little bit, obviously. But I really, really like this team because I think Fate is a great addition. There were a lot of questions about Fearless going into last season that he very, very quickly dispelled, that he proved that he was a deserving Overwatch League caliber main tank, and he was one of the best players in the league last season. Fate has been a very consistent player. He's not the flashiest main tank player. He doesn't really come in and make a ton of huge, big impact plays in the same way that Fearless did. But I think Fate is still a very good player. He's an incredibly talented main tank player. When you look at his success rate, right? Like he was on the number 2 seeded team from 2018. He was on an LA Valiant team that was really struggling and kind of imploding. And when he gets traded to the Florida Mayhem, they start to do much better going into Stage 4 of 2019. And then, of course, in 2020, the Florida Mayhem, a top 10 team, top 4 team in North America, number 6 overall in the standings. Very, very good player. So I do think Fate coming in is not going to be a huge problem for this team. You also have not just chemistry with Moon, he also played with Izayaki for at least a little bit of time with the LA Valiant. So there are some major connections here between Fate and this roster that I think will help this team a lot. I think it's very important that the way this team works Fate in is with Izayaki in the flex support position, because if you take one of the starting pieces out, being Fearless, and replace it with Fate, I think this team will find much more success than if you make a second change as well, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I really do like this tank line. This, to me, is a top-level tank line. They might struggle a little bit early on. There's also the possibility that because of how much later this season is starting than the previous seasons, that we don't see a noticeable dip in their start of their performance, specifically because they have a lot more time to kind of mesh together and start to play well. So it'll be interesting to see, but I do think that this is a very good tank line, and I think that Fate and Void are two very good players that will work very well together, and I'm excited to see this tank line. I think this is a very good leadership figure in Fate. I don't know who the main leadership figure was for the Shanghai Dragons last season. I don't know if it was Fearless. I don't know if it was somebody else. I really have no idea. But I'm very interested to see if Fate is that new leadership figure for the Shanghai Dragons, and maybe he brings something that helps his team just get even better than what we saw from them last season. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see, though. I think this tank line is very good, and I think they will be a very, very solid piece for this Shanghai Dragons team going into 2021. The final part of this roster is the support line. Returning main support Lee Jae-gon, one of the best main supports from last season, once again a role star support player. I think he was one of the most impressive rookies just in the way he played. His style was very interesting and very different from some of the other main supports we saw. Very aggressive, could be punished at times, and I think ultimately it was one of the things that cost this team in the playoffs when they played against the San Francisco Shock. Lee Jae-gon was getting punished too much, called out too much, or caught out too much, and I think that was something that needs to be worked on. But he's still incredibly talented, and I don't think that alone is enough to kind of stop this team from succeeding. His Lucio is incredible. His Brig is pretty good. It's not something that I think is something that he's super well known for, but he's definitely one of the top level Brigs in the league. So that's really good for this Shanghai Dragons team. And his Mercy is decent. You don't really watch Lee Jae-gon for the Mercy, so you definitely want to see a lot of him on Lucio, and that's what I hope we get to see more of with Lee Jae-gon. Very good player, and I think he is arguably the best main support, Korean main support right now, and I think that is the player to look out for. Now, when we go to the flex support position, this is where it gets very interesting. As I said before, this is arguably the weakest point on this roster. It's either this or Fate, and even then Fate I think is very, very good and not really a problem. Izayaki and Mali are the flex supports for this team. Izayaki is incredibly talented, and I think when you look at talent alone, Izayaki is one of the best and one of the top level talents at the position. I don't know if he has the best game sense and best positioning of all the players in the league. There are times where I look at him play and I get a little concerned with the way he's playing. It's not too bad. I think in general he's very good. And I think he took a huge step forward for the Shanghai Dragons in 2020 than he did when he was with the Valiant in 2019 and then was transitioned to the Dragons. I think he's better now significantly than he was in 2019, which I think is a huge benefit to this team. And I think that he is a very important part of this puzzle. And because he already has some of that existing synergy with Fate, I think how well Izayaki plays is very important. But the Shanghai Dragons made it sound very likely that Mali, the only Chinese player on this roster, formerly of the Chengdu Hunters, would be a significant piece to this team. Now, whether or not that means he's only going to play in kind of those double flex support positions or compositions, or if he is going to be a starter over Izayaki, I don't know. But this is an interesting move to me. Now, the Shanghai Dragons have gone out and said that Mali can com in Korean, completely can com in Korean, which gives me a ton more confidence in his ability to succeed on this team. But I still have questions about this pickup. Seemingly, or most likely, it was a trade to acquire Mali. And I look at Mali as a player. I thought he was the best player on Chengdu last year. Some people might say it was Jinmu or Among, but I think it was Mali. I thought Mali was incredible, and I thought he was very underrated for what he was able to do throughout the season. He was able to match up against some of the best flex supports in the league. You put him in a good team like Shanghai, I think he will shine if given the opportunities. But as the only Chinese player on a Korean roster, I have a couple worries in terms of how he's going to perform. He might be able to comm in Korean, and if it's a good enough calming structure, he'll be able to be just fine in the way he plays. My fear and worry about Mali is that he's the only Chinese player on this roster, which culturally might cause some problems. He may struggle to kind of fit in with the rest of this team. He may struggle to kind of connect with the rest of this team because he's the only Chinese player. And there are some Chinese members of the organization, obviously, and there's the Team CC Contenders team, which is also a predominantly Korean or predominantly Chinese Contenders roster. So I think there's a very good chance that you look at a lot of those players from that team, and maybe he kind of spends a lot of time with them and bonds a lot with the Contenders players. I don't know how close the Team CC players are with the Shanghai Dragons organization. Obviously, we've seen some players from the Shanghai Dragons get moved down to Team CC, or players from Team CC get promoted, primarily Fearless. He's the main one who we saw make that move. So it's interesting to me. I'm curious to see that spot specifically, to see how it goes and to see who is the main players that get kind of pulled from that team. And how that team interacts with Mali, and if that kind of helps Mali work a little more with this team. I really don't know. It's an interesting signing to me. It seems to me like Shanghai wanted to make sure they had a Chinese player on the roster, and they went out and found one of, if not the best Chinese player in the league to bring into this team. But I do have some concerns about whether or not he will find playtime, because he's a good enough player that he doesn't need to be on a two-way contract. He shouldn't be in Contenders. He has proven himself to be an Overwatch League talent, but will he get enough playtime to kind of seemingly allow him to grow as a player? I don't know. I kind of wish he stayed on Chengdu or went to Hangzhou or Guangzhou, or I think he would have had a better chance of actually having an impact. As good as Guangzhou brings in Kariv, I'd rather have Mali than Kariv personally, and I think that's one of those things where Shanghai getting Mali is just interesting to me, and I think he's not the best option, and I think that they should have looked elsewhere for getting a flex support if they wanted if they wanted to get another Chinese player. They should have looked elsewhere. I think they would have been better off keeping Dia, or just not bringing in a player who I think won't get a ton of play time on this roster. But hey, I could be wrong, and if he gets worked in very well, then even better. But in general, I think that it's an interesting signing. So before I end this video, I just want to talk real quickly about this team and how I think they will match up to what they did last season. I still think this is a top 3 roster in the league. There's very few rosters that I think are better than this one. I don't think they're going to be a two-loss team this season. I think that there are other teams in the league that are going to be in Asia. Philadelphia is going to be in Asia. Hangzhou looks much improved. Guangzhou still looks pretty good. New York might be there. They might lose to New York. We'll see about that one. There's a possibility that some of these rosters, even Seoul, who had a good run last season, if they can kind of clean up their roster and kind of get it in the right direction, that's a scary team. So I don't think you should expect Shanghai to be a two-loss team again, but I do still think there's a very good chance that this is a team that could finish the season as the winners of the Pacific Conference. They are competing with San Francisco for that title, which is funny that San Francisco still has never won the Pacific Conference despite having 2 championships. It's weird, it's wild, but it's the way that the league has worked so far. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on Shanghai. I think they're still going to be a very good team. I don't know if they're the best team in the league anymore. I tend to think that they are not. I think right now the San Francisco Shock are better, but we'll talk about them next week at some point, probably Monday. That was when they should be on the docket. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Shanghai Dragons. Let me know your thoughts on the team in the comments down below. If you agree with me, disagree with me, I'd love to have a discussion with you down below. But that is all for me today. If you want more content like this, consider liking and subscribing. But I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much once again. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.